So. Okay. Hello, good afternoon. I've just been chairing a meeting of the UN Security Council to discuss the important issue of accountability and justice for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. And I'd just like to make a few opening remarks before I hand over to Pramila Patten, SRSG, who's well known to you, and of course, Nadia Murad, who is an incredible advocate on this very issue. Sadly, as we've heard again today, justice is ridden with obstacles for survivors, and survivors face many hurdles to access the justice, the support they need. And it's our job as a collective international community to remove those very obstacles. We need, frankly, to do better. And survivors' experiences and rights must be very much at the heart of what we do. That's why, as President of the Security Council, the United Kingdom invited Nadia Murad to the Council to propose a new global conduct. And I'm delighted and thankful to Nadia for her support, but others. And we have named it very much the Murad Code, developed by Nadia and other survivors, to tell the international community how better to support survivors. It sets out key standards to reduce the burden on survivors and ensure they have their experiences recorded, first and foremost, safely. Secondly, in a way that strengthens the pursuit of justice. And thirdly, reduces the risk that these incredible, courageous individuals are not then having to be re-traumatized through the process. It was funded by the United Kingdom and has been developed in conjunction by Nadia's initiative and the Institute for International Criminal Investigations. You only have to look at the news headlines once again today, tragically, as to why this particular code is needed so urgently. Just last week, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky himself told the very Security Council that I've just chaired that Russian forces in Bucha had gang-raped women, including directly in front of their children. Other conflicts too, as we've heard today, in northern Ethiopia, Syria, Myanmar, and Iraq, have drawn the issue into sharp focus. Despite the fact that the perpetration of sexual violence in armed conflict, it's been a war crime for over a century, yet it still happens in 2022. I'm deeply humbled to be part of the launch of this important code, the Murad Code, and I urge everyone, an NGO, government, any body involved that has a role in documenting and indeed investigating conflict-related sexual violence, please adopt it. Further violence cannot be prevented unless perpetrators are brought to justice and held accountable. And I hope very much that the Murad Code becomes the gold standard for any NGO, government, and charity working on this issue. It's now my pleasure to hand over to Nadia Murad, who will make some brief comments, and then we'll hear from SRSG Patten, and then we will take a few questions. Thank you. Nadia.
Thank you so much. Too often, in times of global instability, the issues that affect women and girls, like conflict-related sexual violence, are pushed aside. This approach is short-sighted and dangerous. That is why I'm so grateful to Lord Ahmad and Ambassador Woodward and the UK for convening today's open debate on accountability as prevention of sexual violence in conflict. The pursuit of justice is one of the most visible forms of accountability. So today, I'm calling on the UN to put ISIS on trial for genocide and sexual violence. Because accountability also means support for survivors. The UN Security Council should send a special envoy to end the suffering of Yazidi women and girls in Iraq. As we move forward, we must ensure the work we do for survivors is done hand in hand with survivors themselves. And I look forward to joining Lord Ahmad tomorrow to release the Murad Code, a set of guidelines for journalists, investigators, and anyone tasked with documenting conflict-related sexual violence. Sexual violence tears apart communities and destabilizes democracies. In order to address this urgent problem on a global scale. We need more than moral outrage. We need actions and justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. SRSG.
Thank you. I would just like to take this opportunity to thank Lord Ahmad personally and the government of the UK for chairing this open debate, which is more important today than ever before. It's good to be back in person before the Security Council, but as you can see, the report of the Secretary General for 2021 paints a very somber picture. In spite of COVID-related restrictions to reporting, we have been able to verify over 3,000 cases of sexual violence, an increase of approximately 800 cases from 2020. I'm grateful that today's debate focuses on accountability as prevention. And we cannot talk about accountability without talking about justice as a deterrence. What is happening in Ukraine is a classic example of women's bodies being part of the battlefield and women, whoever the perpetrators are, being converted into weapons of war. I think I would prefer to take questions because I made a very long statement this morning, and I know in the interest of time, I'd rather give you the opportunity of raising questions.
Yep. Thank you. SRSG. I think we'll take a few questions. Edie, nice to see you.
Thank you very much for doing this little press conference. Ms. Patten, you talked about the 5 Security Council resolutions that basically demand protection for women in conflict, and you asked how the Council felt would react to several conflicts, including Ukraine, Afghanistan, Myanmar, and others. How do you feel after this meeting? And this goes to all of you because you all criticized not only the Security Council, but the rest of the world for not taking significant action to make accountability for sexual violence crimes happen. How do you feel after this meeting? Do you think that perhaps the war in Ukraine and the spotlight now might actually lead to any kind of more concerted action on accountability?
You want to first?
Well, I think my question to members of the Security Council remains valid. What is happening in Ukraine and elsewhere, Yemen, Afghanistan, Ethiopia, to mention but a few, is not due to a lack of any normative framework. We have a solid normative framework, and that's why I started my statement by raising this question to members of the Council. What we have to do now is to transform these resolutions into solutions and all these commitments into compliance. And it is the responsibility of the Council to use all the tools that it has at its disposal. And I'm mentioning specifically sanctions, because there's no alignment between parties listed in the annex to the Secretary General's report and the sanctions inflicted by a sanctions committee. So that is a key message that I have and I will have for many years to come, in the name of all the survivors around the world. And let's not allow the Ukraine crisis to eclipse conflict all around the world. And let us not allow victims in Ukraine to eclipse forgotten victims all around the world. Let us think of all survivors all over the place, all over the world.
You want to say anything? No, well,
Let Nadia answer my question.
if we could just, this may be just done, as we're sorting translation, just very briefly, and we will take other questions as well. Just, Edie, just on your very point about more action. Of course, more action's needed because we need more prosecutions to take place. When you look at conflicts of the past, it needs to happen. In the context of Ukraine, I am very much conscious of what's happening in Ukraine, as we all are. We're absolutely the abhorrent crimes which are being committed, the growing evidence, and it is right. And what we have seen is the International Criminal Court, for example, very much step up. The prosecutor has opened an investigation, and the United Kingdom is also, amongst other countries, lent not just technical support and financial support, but expert support to the ICC, and also, for example, in the appointment of Sir Howard Morrison, himself a distinguished judge at the ICC, he's working directly with the Ukrainian prosecutor. So there are steps being taken, and sometimes, tragically, it takes a further tragedy to really get the world to live up to its promises. And as Pramila Patten has already said, the structures are there. We need to bring them together. That's why when we talk of conventions, it's a whole, we bring everything into one place. But clearly what's needed, as Nadia said, I said, we all said, is the pathways to justice must have obstacles removed. So ultimately, it's all about survivors, that they know what their options are and that they can see ultimately justice being served. Nadia? If you just come to the microphone.
وقا قالك ضحية عنف جنسي لعلي دنياي ما بنا ناس كليا بهرجارك از بيمدا قال عنف جنسي شخصي عائلي أملات لعلي دنياي بي وقصدي بريد بينم بو مثلا بدلائل بينم بآلي تعداد جنين بي.
If we quickly translate for.
مثلا ما بنا وقا ناس كليا بيتشتي الزيم دايما بيجن.
In my time in this building, since I've been coming here, I've known this building for testimonies of survivors, for testimonies of brave survivors that have provided personal testimonies, testimonies about their families, communities, and entire countries.
إبراهيم تشتمهم يروما قرر عندي وقامل سر بيفتين البراد تشتمهم يهجا وقا عمل سر بيفتين إنه عمل منه إنه تشتكي شيء إنه همو بدلائل بعد نبر ما دلائل همو تشتت يتحوجه كمحكمة بيا أدانين مبخرة آنينا قصة شخصي دلائل هزارت الضحية الهمو آلي دنيا هكا تعدلي تذكرن ووقت ما عند دلائل بينن وبين بيدري وقا أوقا ديناميني هكا عدالتنا يحققن.
The important thing is that today, during this discussion, we all provided evidence. There is evidence, overwhelming evidence of what is happening in different places. Survivor provided testimonies, and civil society provided testimonies and personal stories from around the globe. So we have the evidence, we have what we need. In the next step, we know it needs to go to a court for justice.
Thank you. If we could take a couple more questions. Yes, how are you? Nice to see you again.
It's nice to see you, Lord Ahmad, SRSG. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News. My question is to Nadia. Just how can this code help people in Ukraine? And what are your thoughts when you see what's going on? That they'll get justice, or is it just depressing to watch this go on again? Thank you.
أما اللي من قالك يا إنه مراد كود و بيجهك وقت ضحية يوكرين تعداد جنسي اللي ذكرن وقاربن إفادة خطيرة بدن إفادة وان نوكا بهش سالة وقت ضحية مثلا ازدياهات داعش بيكري قالك إفادة من زانن شبيهاتن وقال لورد أحمد البيبا خدا جو ضحية كي قلت يا بيستوهف جارة قصاخة البية قلت يا هتانها مثلا عدالة جرنا هاتيا أمي بآلي مراد كود حاولين إنه ببيجهكي آمن إشوان راح وزانبن بشتهنجي مبيرد بقريبن قصيدوان الكوينة استخدام كرنوشنو.
My very hope is that the Murad Code will be used as a guide, because when investigating, collecting evidence in Ukraine and other places, because as Lord Ahmad mentioned during his remarks, that a survivor told him that 27 times she has provided her testimony and she doesn't know what happens to that testimony. And the Murad Code exactly provides that safe guidelines for investigating, collecting evidence. And as it happened with Yazidis in the past, Yazidi survivors in the past 8 years, Some women provided their testimonies, and they did not know what happened to them.
If I could take one more question.
Thank
Please.
you. Shiho Matsuga from Japan's Nippon Television. My question is for Ms. Nadia Murad. As the reports of sexual violence increase in Ukraine, what do you hope to see happen? And secondly, if you were to meet Ukrainian women that have been sexually abused, what message would you like to tell them? Thank you.
وكإنسانة وكا تعدلي هذه كرنو العائلة وشمال خدر كدي وهموت اشتسر عليكي وكا ديني وسر عليكي مختلف أسكالكي وكا دلمي بخلكي جنو كاتشك يكسر إيد أوكرانيا إجبر تشتكي إيقانج إش حربيناي حتى كحرب سكيني جي جنو كاتشكين إيد هكا تعدا هكا ليدي كرن درنج وكا اتعالجن أسبهور ناكم إيرو كاتشكو جنيت يوكرين تشت مثلا مسجك إش مدبي تشتيش مدبي إنه نهيلن بيا كرر عندن تشتي مهادي بسريوان هادي أسبهورت كموانش مدبي إيرو البرقالي بكن إنه هيشين نبوين بمنعين نأم مسج عبدني دا بشتي تشي وين شلو بكن.
As a survivor and someone who lost family and community because of our religion and because of the brutality we faced, my heart is with the people of Ukraine, especially the women and girls out there that are facing this brutality. We all know nothing good comes out of war, and the trauma, even if the war ends, the trauma will remain with ordinary people. I don't think the Ukrainian women just want a message from me. What they want is action. We all need to work to try and prevent as much as possible before it occurs more and more.
I think we'll need to just draw this to a close. I just want to thank all of you. One thing I would request, though, you're all reporters, and one of the things we really do need is the reporting of issues of sexual violence in conflict. So that's a plea from me to all of you, because if that's one area we can really focus on, you have it within the power of the pen or the power of the iPad or whatever you want to call it, to really bring to life the stories of survivors, and they have to be the center of our response. And just picking up on the question you gave, you asked Nadia, I think one of the things that we're really focused on is learning what's happened previously and putting them into practice. And we already are now collecting evidence now through various UN agencies with NGOs on the ground in a very structured way. And as I said, the investigation from the International Criminal Court has already been stood up. What the Nadia, or the code does, the Murad code does, is very much codify all the different ways of doing. So when the person's going in with good intention, they ask the right question, and they ensure the question is asked in a manner that evidence is then sustained and collected in a manner which ultimately will allow for a successful prosecution, and that's what we all desire. Perpetrators must be brought to justice. Putting survivors first is the key message of what we discussed today and on this initiative. I'd like to thank all of you.
I just want to add that there's also the Commission of Inquiry mandated by the Human Rights Council. We have a large technical team that has been deployed, and even my office is providing staff with the sexual violence expertise to be embedded in the Commission of Inquiry, but also is in the Human Rights Monitoring Team, so that verification is happening, investigation has started, in addition to all the work being done, because Ukraine is not at ground zero. They have a national action plan on prevention and response to conflict-related sexual violence from 2014. So we are supporting, and I'm working on a draft framework of cooperation with the government of Ukraine that could be signed on the 2nd of May, and I will be going to Ukraine with, and deploy staff in Ukraine, but also in Poland and Moldova, in some refugee-receiving countries where we think that this humanitarian crisis is also turning into a human trafficking crisis. So just to tell you that the UN is very, very mobilized in terms of supporting the government of Ukraine and the people of Ukraine. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.